Eric Mashinsky, Gold Investment Letter, Phenom Crypto Letter. Here today with, he's become a friend remotely, and we're going to get together in the next couple of weeks in person. I'm an investor in his fund, Libertas. He's a thought leader, certainly in the crypto space, traditional capital markets, and many other things. Chris Sullivan from Hyperion Decimus. How you doing, man?
Wonderful, Eric. Thanks for having me. It's a privilege.
Yeah, I just am excited to talk to you and get some of your thoughts on everything that's going on. And right before we pressed record, I was just talking about the email that I sent out last night to, Gold Investment Letter readers that came from my crypto letter from last Sunday. And it was kind of under the guise of like, my tone has changed. I'm not shy about it. Like, we have a situation in the world that is both, terrifying and exciting, I would say, and like, it's all right there. And for me, I see things, some things are very still hazy, like trying to figure out exactly how things are going to play out. And I want to get some of your feedback, just how you see certain things. But I think there's so many fundamental things we can address and historical things that we can address as precedents for people to make sure that they're getting valuable information from this time together with you. What's going on out there, man? What is happening?
I think to kind of unlock and unleash some of that, what I've noticed by just tons of people coming and asking me is that in order to unlock more awareness, we really have to come at it from a different way than most. Almost all the time, I get the question of why is this happening? Why would they do this? Oh, what's their end game? And that doesn't make any sense, right? So it kind of, what it does is it gives you a little bit of allowance to be negligent in your diligence or research to uncover truth using critical thinking, reason, and logic. So what I typically have learned to respond to is how and what are the mechanics, right? This is a long time coming. This is a long story. In historical terms, a couple hundred years isn't really that much, but if you argue the advent of the modern Western central banking system, which has now consumed all but 4% of the planet, that began in the mid 18th century. The birthing of the United States of America was a direct fight and conflict to that. Many of our presidents, most famously Andrew Jackson, have fought against it and were perhaps executed by them, JFK. And this is really a battle between not just like good and evil, it's a battle between freedom, sovereignty versus control and slavery. Now, I think, and I don't really watch any TV, news is all fake, right, left, whatever. I only consume alternative media and then data and statistics as a quant. The reality of it is that COVID brought forward probably the demise of the financial system. Not only could you tell that by the 39 trillion they printed in 2020 globally, but that's what we know of, right? Because all the money printing that just happened in the last week or so, only 300 billion of debt was monetized on the Fed's balance sheet. So we have no idea where these dollar swap lines are going. No one's accounting or tracking it. So the data I'm going to share, I'm going to caveat and say this is publicly available, agreed upon data. I don't personally believe it's factual. What we don't know is always worse than what we do know. Yeah. So with that kind of caveat, I think what has really harmed humanity in really the last decade, insofar as the ability to deal with this, is you've made a supercomputer your appendage, and you've been diluted. Your personality, your spirit has been diluted. Chemicals, poor food, pollution, toxic propaganda, psyop warfare, mass formation psychosis, and literally every aspect of this control system has its branches in big pharma, military industrial complex, centralized tech, big tech, insurance, and then the legal tort monopolies, right, by the plaintiffs' lawyers. So that's all one and the same to me. So I don't really delineate between them. I don't call them elites because they're certainly not elite. So I think like people have been droned into a lack of being able to realize, pivot, and prepare, which may be on purpose for their agenda. So I think unlike other times in history where people are already used to hard times, this one is going to be perceived to be very, very painful because people have believed lies and are not prepared and have really been incentivized to not look under the sheets, so to speak, to not dig, to not prepare themselves and their families the way that other generations had to because of, I mean, we didn't even have power 150 years ago, right? I mean, so
we didn't even have a phone that was mobile 22 years ago. You know, I had a flippy, maybe in
well,
2000.
and look at how long it took to get there. Nikola Tesla came up with that idea in like 1908 or something like that, you know.
Yeah, right.
So I just my I kind of, the bleeding heart side of me is very sympathetic and empathetic with people who are going to suffer consequences that are really a problem of society. But if someone is not willing to take personal responsibility, try and lead a life of self-sovereignty, then arguably they deserve what's coming.
Yeah, that's a philosophical question that, you know, I guess I think probably what you and I agree on is, like, right now, I'm not going to pull any punches on my dialogue because it's kind of, it's time to send the warning for what I see, set the alarm off. Like, it's time to, like, so let's talk a little bit about, we're going to put this in the framework, obviously, of the markets, crypto. I'll interject, we'll talk about gold money in general. What is, like you said, earlier, what is money, when we were chatting? And it's like, we'll get on to those things and look at the framework of how anybody listening in can profit from this. But really, it's like, I see the responsibility to voice what I see and to elaborate on that, because I've had an interesting, life and journey in the financial markets and in life itself. And, like, I'm flared up with bright lights blinging. Like, it's not that I'm afraid, and it's not that I'm trying to instill fear in anybody, but it's a warning so that people can take fairly drastic action if they want to make moves really to anticipate a new system. That's what I don't think that people are getting, right?
The major selling point of at least doing that, Eric, is if that's wrong,
go back.
You don't lose, right? You maybe miss some upside, you maybe spend some time, but that is a positive convexity activity right there. So I in some regards, it's almost too late to start moving, Eric. Like,
yeah.
So I think it is prudent spiritually and ethically to, at least on record, hey, all my loved ones, friends, and family, please do the best that you can to prepare yourselves mentally, physically, financially, because this is game on. And it's going to be orders of magnitude larger than 08 and 1929.
And what do you see? So on that note, which I agree with, what makes you think, if you do, I don't know for sure, but, and so before I get into, is this all going down right now? Or is it like they can keep kicking the can down the road like we've seen over and over? And
well, it's both. It's both. Like, what catalyst was there for a bunch of banks to be insolvent? Oh, none. They already were fucking insolvent.
They already all are insolvent. It's the whole system, the way it's set up.
So, is it unraveling now? Yeah, it's been unraveling for 30 years. Are they going to try and kick the can? Absolutely. So, we may, each one of these QE events, though, is buying less and less time and causing more and more damage. So, I don't get really predictive with timelines in absolutes, and I don't even like speaking in absolutes, but whether it's 2 months or 2 years, physics and mathematics don't lie, and they're never
It's
wrong.
at the door, is what you're saying, right? I mean, that's what you feel as well, because it's at the door. It doesn't matter. If we have 2 years, all the better, right? I would take that. But like, let's talk about Balaji Srinivasan. We talked about this briefly on the phone. And, Balaji's a guy who, I don't know him, never met him, but I respect him. I respect his intellect and, his success, certainly in venture and in crypto. He was the CTO of Coinbase. He's a pretty prolific Silicon Valley, what you would call angel investor, and he's very connected and he's very smart. And, I think he spent 4 hours on the Lex Friedman podcast going through all kinds of different things. He's a philosopher, he's many things, but he's also very smart about economics and math. And so, tech, programming, crypto, he's been involved in Bitcoin for a long time and he's very rich from it. So he's also benefited from his thought thesis, which is where, that's the reason I think at the end of the day, why people want to take the time to listen to things like this, because, if you can profit and you can have that self-sovereignty, you're ahead of most. So he came out with a bet, and it's unclear if he bet $1 million or $2 million, but he did bet at least $1 million. He didn't offer the bet, so it wasn't like his idea to do this. I think he reacted when somebody said, if you think Bitcoin hyper Bitcoinization is what he calls it, is going to happen within 90 days, because he called it the bit signal, and basically put one of his charts together that showed this absolute straight up parabola of the Bitcoin price coming imminently. And that's because he sees the collapsing of additional banks and the system and people being forced. And this all comes together, the regulatory environment, the pressures, the focusing on the crypto banks in the system, things like that, to take the on ramps and off ramps sort of offside.
Yeah, I mean, that's why they did that ahead of this event.
Absolutely. And I want to get your color on that. But he's basically saying, to wrap that up, it's like, this is all going down right now. And so within 90 days, Bitcoin could be over $1 million. I'll bet you $1 million that it will. So I don't believe, and he's actually said this in follow-on interviews, that he necessarily believes it is going to be 90 days. But what he's saying is the point, is the urgency of the matter, I think, is what came home to roost for me too, where I'm like, this guy's speaking my language. It's how I feel. I'm getting this reflection of that intuitiveness of like, it is game on now. You don't have this in the future. Artificial intelligence is coming, the metaverse, Web3. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, well, there's no such thing as AI.
We'll get into that separately. I've got a question for you on machine learning.
There's no such thing yet as sentient AI. So a lot to unpack. Where would you like me to start?
So this bet, this spirit of the bet is that this is going down right now.
It is, and it has. So actually, where he could have made the bet, which would be, quantitatively and systematically a good one, was in August of 2019. This will go down in history as the beginning of the unraveling of all the insolvent banks, where since August of 2019, there has been $2+ trillion in the overnight repo. And it's very much this rules for thee and not for me. They pay a higher rate of interest. The money is just conjured. There's no backing or collateral to it. And, if I'm a bank like B of A, which is one of the Fed member banks, though, too big to fail, will be last bank to fail kind of thing. How is it that I can get 3% annualized in overnight in August of 2019, but then me as Chris Sullivan, Bank of America credit card holder, I'm paying 21% in interest on my credit card, when theoretically, certainly not legislatively or legally, the Federal Reserve is putting all of their debt on my bloodline's back? Riddle me that. And then, okay, we're going to bail out our commie leftist woke tards at Silicon Valley, but we're not going, if people cannot appraise it for what it is, and just to be apolitical here, I'm neither right nor left. This is uniparty. I'm freedom maximalist, rule of law, Uh, so I think that he could have made that trade there and justified it in the same exact way I'm about to justify it. Essentially, the dollar swap lines have been engaged again. For some reason, the US Federal Reserve is basically bailing out all big bank entities globally. They're forcing mergers like Credit Suisse and UBS. All of this opacity in, we have no idea what the valuations are, what the assets are, what the collateral is, what's the NAV of the assets, is there even a bidder ask? All of that's bad. And then what I was kind of shocked, because I not too far different from Harry Dent and Peter Schiff, seen this coming my entire adult life too. They bailed in the bondholders, but then the stockholders got a piece. So let me understand this. The contract that is the debt obligation of the bond.
And you're talking about Credit Suisse, right?
Yeah, is null and void. And you're just going to, by diktat, wipe out our money and bail it in? Okay, yes, that just happened. So they're violating the existing law. Again, rules for thee, not for me. Then, if you reference the secret or leaked tape of the FDIC, month and a half or 2 months ago, they literally described exactly what just happened. And bank bail-ins will be the result, because every panic, 1907 panic, the 1929 panic, the savings and loan crisis, all that did was go up from hundreds of thousands of banks to now hundreds of banks, because it's always about consolidation and power. And when they entrap everyone in the 6 Fed member banks, then they're going to roll out the 666 money, the central bank digital currency. Now, you and I reside in Florida. Our governor has put forth legislation that will pass to block it from occurring in the state, but that's going to harm us in other ways too, with access to commerce, especially relating to logistics and shipping. That is the agenda, right? You can throw in all the other crazy stuff like the vax and the chemtrails and the poison food, but this is what's occurring right now. And at least financially, you have to prepare for it, but first prepare to lose less and then prepare to profit.
Right. Absolutely. When you say there's 2 things there I want to zero in on. One is going backwards, the 6 Fed member banks, you're forecasting what is probably going to happen at an accelerated pace from what we've seen. The
I'm not
stages.
forecasting. That's exactly what happened. JP Morgan's never going out of business. They roll them all up into JP Morgan,
Yeah, right. It's gonna. That's where I had a call with a long-term member and his wife, and they're, I think, in their 70s. He's a doctor in San Francisco, and they were talking about the banks. They just opened a bank at this account in this place, and they were like regional. And I said, you should think about maybe doing the opposite. Just go to Bank of America, and like you're going to probably be okay, because if that goes down and JP goes down, we're all pretty much, it's all fucked.
Where you're not going to be okay is that Fed now is live, and they will do that to your B of A account the day they can do CBDC. Your community bank won't have that system. Right. So me personally, while I may have a joint checking account with Chase that has a few dollars in it with my wife, I have any stored cash assets at community banks, one of which I have to be on the board of. But those banks do not have the tech apparatus to get force bailed in by the FDIC, or to say, okay, Eric, you've got 100K USD at B of A. Here's 30 Empire credits. Oh, and you only are allotted 2 pounds of meat this week. So,
I mean, do you really think that's where it's going?
That's where they want it to go, Eric. I honestly believe they are too incompetent and lack the technological savviness to execute it.
Yeah, I agree. But the 666 money, why do you reference it as the 666 money?
Well,
I mean, I understand.
I cannot think of anything more evil, except for harming children, than a central bank digital currency.
Yeah. So part of what, when I mentioned themes, because there's so much to talk about, you did zero in on the lack of rule of law as one that you're seeing out there. Can you expound on that a little bit for people and why this is so important?
Well, the founders wrote the most perfect form of government, at least while humanity's been around, And we've got that to adhere to with our business practices, our familial practices, our commerce practices. We are so far from that in every way, shape, or form that you can cite a million different examples right now. And no lawyering, because the DOJ is corrupt, because all of the AGs are corrupt. You can't, lawyer your way out by having a lot of money. Look at the Jan 6 protesters. They've been in jail illegally without due process just because Biden administration says so, right? The banks let's go through 08. They forced some out of business that they didn't like competing with, and then rolled up others into ones that didn't want them. I was at Morgan Stanley when John Mack rejected the banks that they wanted to roll into Morgan Stanley. And Morgan Stanley didn't need a bailout, and they forced them to take the money anyways. So I could cite a zillion examples of this. I mean, even the so-called, we're okay with children at age 7 having enough wherewithal to choose to have a, made infertile via surgery or medicine. I mean, this is all insane and outside the realms of what's written in the Constitution. And then I like referencing the Articles of Confederation. That's actually my favorite government document of all time. And then the worst part of it, Eric, isn't so much the, bailing out of their friends and the living above the law. It's the fact that our court system cannot represent the rule of law for you and I.
Yeah. Yes. And that's why we have to take, to a degree, our futures into our own hands, right? Because you can't rely on these things to have your back. In fact, they tend to turn on you. But talk a little bit, Chris. I think one of the things I've skipped over with you before, and even in the beginning of this, because you come from I wouldn't call it a traditional background or Wall Street background, but you did start on the street, right? And even go back before that, because we were talking about AI/machine, what is machine learning? What is sentient AI? You're actually qualified to talk about this stuff because you went to MIT for
machine learning and blockchain.
Okay, so and that's right there. And so you went from that, and I know even before that, from your college education, you started off. I saw in one of your interviews you actually went into it vis-a-vis music. So you have a very diverse background, and then you ended up post school at Morgan Stanley first. Talk a little bit about your background on the street.
Yeah, right out of college, and I was the last class where there were 30 people in my hiring class, and you're in a classroom, for lack of a better setting, and you have to take all these series exams. You have to go on different desks for 6 months and shadow people and be there, like 19 hours a day, and learn everything you could as fast as you could before they would unleash you. And you would get a stipend of like $1,200 a month. And it wasn't like it is now, where these kids are getting, hundreds of thousands out of the silver spoon schools when they can't even do anything. So I'm very grateful and feel blessed that Morgan Stanley ran me through that initial gauntlet, because that sort of education does not exist anymore. I mean, that's a macro prudential risk to the entire system, because you don't really have trade desks making markets for the investment banks anymore, and you don't have people there that actually know how markets function.
So how did that work? You got pulled right into, like, straight up, was it like you were on the trading desk, but you have this quant, sort of background. So did you learn at Morgan Stanley?
No, so that was, the quant stuff really got going, in the late 90s and 2002. What happened with me is that after watching 08, right, and seeing what that did and what the government's response was, and then how the investment firms changed, I did not want to have any part of, dealing stuff they're trying to get off their balance sheet, lying about the total cost of a BlackRock mutual fund, like all of the above just really went against my ethos as a human being. And I started my own firm in late 2010 and launched a volatility arbitrage fund in 2011 that We actually had the crypto fund open in 2018 simultaneously. Crypto is a lot more fun and is 24/7. So we shut down that other fund that did real well. What led me to Quant was after you kind of go through fundamental analysis, which is actually a piece of cake. It's really, really easy. And it really has no expression of price ever. When you do a correlation to fundamentals, it only matters at 2 points. And those are two huge cyclical mean reverting points that the time horizon of which is more than people's investment horizons, right? Like you could buy in 87, 94, 2001, 2009, 2006. They're like, these are not events that are going to occur a ton of times. You got to be a buyer of every one of them. So I just kind of ran out of things to learn after learning, gap accounting, which by the way, since 2014, almost no publicly traded equities conform to that anymore. I don't know why, but again, no rule of law. And then Quant was really a way to utilize math where it's less conjecture and more objective probability analysis. And there's all these different types of ways to parse out numbers, whether it's Gaussian or linear regression, point in time. So I really just got enamored with that. And that's what led me to do the 3 years charter market technician program. And then you get code's actually not that hard, and you could set different adaptive settings, even by minute intervals. And it's just a lot more reliable than, hey, the management team said they're going to do 9% more revenue next quarter, but I have to wait 90 more days to see if they were actually right. I'm not investing on that. It blows me away that 3 generations of men and women have tolerated this type of system without questioning it. It is just unbelievable. The whole thing. It's just usury theft everywhere.
Right. And it's right now. So we're going to point out, I think we could zero in a bit on the obvious glaring sort of broken systemic problems, but then we're going to talk about, I want to, share with people, like, what do you do? What do you do? How do you, protect yourself, number one, and then B, how do we profit potentially from what is happening in our world, which is really not only the scope and size, just because of the amount of people that are out there, but just in intensity and in egregiousness to me. But talk about the banking system and the dollar-based system that we have in the world. What comes to your mind when you just start to think about the top concerns about where all of this is today, and the fact that every single fiat currency in history goes to zero?
Well, arguably it already is. Since 71, it's lost 98% of its purchasing power. And
Exactly.
Then here's a fun fact. The Dow and S&P have not made new high in real money terms, Eric. You obviously know that, since 1999. So no one's actually made any money in the stock market, which, why does it even exist? Oh, so we can liquidate to an unknowing public. The whole thing makes me sick. That's why I like utility tokens in the crypto space, because they're solving for available use cases. They're being frictionless. They cost nothing to use. And they don't have all of the influence of humans' weaknesses. But to answer your question more specifically, I'm more worried about, what if they don't all go to zero and I have to live another 30 years in the system? That actually frightens me more, especially having young kids. So I think what I could speak to that might create some awareness with your folks is the dollar hegemony is basically done. The war in Ukraine has egregiously accelerated that process to now. I think there was a treaty between Saudi Arabia and Iran yesterday, like mortal enemies. You've forced the entire East to deal with Russia and buy discounted oil. And you've undermined that contract that America had with the planet after World War II. The planet was grateful that the boys of America saved the planet in World War I, World War II. We got the grace of being the reserve currency. And we have bastardized it, manipulated it, and not honored that contract with the rest of the planet. In fact, we've exported inflation to places that can't handle inflation and made people impoverished while our standard of living goes up. So that
Well,
part,
just real quick, touch on the details of that in quick. You can do it in quick summary, but why is that? Why is that the fact? So you've got debts from nations that tend to run and have to run through a dollar denominated system, but yet the dollar being strong during these times when theirs collapses, it's like impossible for them to pay back their debts, and they end up suffering. The populations literally end up in the streets before we do in America, which is kind of like, it's this blessing and curse situation that we've been in. But why is it that America and the US dollar hegemony does and is causing pain and suffering in the rest of the world?
because greedy psychopaths want to extract something for nothing.
I agree with that conclusion. And in fact, it's good enough to move forward. Let's talk about the thing that bothers me the most about all this. Let's talk about crypto, and let's talk about the opportunity there. But part of what Balaji did is it's also, I think, a necessity. It's a necessitous area to understand, at least learn about, and or have exposure to, because it is our way out. It is a way out, but it is probably the way out as well to a new system, and to have it all occur like these things do occur, which is like this, very slowly for a long time and then all at once. And the government here clearly, and the whole thing about people get into the manipulation of the exchange, the government's doing this, they're targeting that. I don't really get into a lot of that noise usually, but here it's just super clear. I mean, they came after Silverbank, they came after, each bank, Silicon Valley Bank. Then we've got, was its signature, I guess the 3 S's there,
Well,
that they came after them. And essentially there's a lot of fucking mess there, but it was targeted to start to dismantle the on and off ramps of crypto. And who it's hurting though, this is where I have a big problem, is that whatever, you can even assume Elizabeth Warren has nothing but pure intentions to protect people with all of her regulatory ambitions. But my thing is, who is she to tell me, or how is she going to tell me that I have additional risk with my money, with what I want to do with my money? And why is she able to even be involved in that? But I can't go buy cryptocurrency on a foreign exchange because of their fear of our government and our enforcement agencies. And it's causing the biggest wealth transfer in the world to ever occur to be put into the hands of international folks outside of the United States. That is a fuck story, and it is very damaging to most folks.
But it's got two simultaneous intentions with it. To go with your point right there, they want people to do that and then lose their money for hack or volatility or whatever and get dissuaded. And then they want to control here so that you can't do it with any trusted counterparty that does good by their clients and tells the truth. So it's both of those simultaneously. It's black and white to me. Silvergate and Signature, and ironically, Barney Frank may be our ally here.
Yeah, I know.
They weren't insolvent, so why did they shut them down? I don't know the answer. I have subjective thoughts on that, likely some sort of blackmail, as it normally is. And then they know this balance sheet issue with the banks has always been there. That's why they QE. That's why the repo's been 2 trillion. That's why they 8 trillion in COVID, blah, blah, blah. It just, we wound that down via inflation and earnings, and there's nothing in the banks. And then there's not, like insurance companies, they hold those same bonds. In fact, much larger portfolios. A lot of them are largely insolvent. They're not as risky because you can't have a huge run on an insurance company, but the version of that is a claim. Now, what claim could come due that near term? It's the credit default swaps that are hitting all-time highs today, above 08, by the way. literally today. And the reality of it is there's no money to pay it out. So I wouldn't even be long credit default swap all the way into the actual, event, because no counterparty's there to pay me.
Yeah.
So, I really don't think they could buy more than 12, 18 months with the kick the can.
If that.
And it'll mathematically damage even worse. Which it is what it is at this point. Our government members are, they work for us. We've allowed them to do this to the planet. We've allowed a select amount of NGOs and organizations like the World Economic Forum and this, that, and the other dictate everything to us without question. And all those who rebel against it are kind of ostracized by society.
We are, but we're also, here's the thing that I believe, and maybe I'm guessing you do too, but in the face of all this power and the elites and the Great Reset and all this shit and all the pressure against us to do the basic recent narrative and just not, move into a new system or have exposure elsewhere to protect ourselves, the end game is that we win. They cannot win. It is over. All right. So how do you see things sort of progressing? Let's just call it over the rest of the year, from some of the things that you would expect to start happening in the banking system. And is there a risk that, we see a flight from the dollar globally?
It's happening now. You know me well, Eric. Predictive at the subjective level is not my strong suit, because it goes against my quantitative, doctrinal nature. But there's never, this is different this time, right? So how does it normally work? Exactly what we're seeing. I would argue some sort of, junk bond default, some sort of catalyst like that creates another leg down, because you've got, I think, 51% of the
episode 30.
Sorry.
51% of the S&P is zombie companies anyways. So, I think that cascading bankruptcies, I think you're going to see consumers wise up and just file BK and say, F you, Visa, F you, Bank of America. And literally, like, we haven't even had a good conversation and discussion about, in 2008 to 2012, they took people's homes from them when they destroyed the economy that the people were paying their mortgage with from their earnings. And then all of a sudden in COVID, oh, I don't got to pay rent or mortgage for 2 years. Riddle me that. These discretionary decisions, not based on fact or rule of law, that's whatever's most expeditious for us to control you and lull you back to sleep and not pay attention. So I think credit event, as well as commerce and corporate and personal, and the one I'm hoping doesn't occur, and I hope Putin maintains his discipline. No nukes.
Yeah, which who knows about that? They might do one just to set that fear out up there.
Yeah, I mean, we should see a false flag there, because that's
false flag. Yeah. And so talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on why are you involved in crypto, Bitcoin, and why is Bitcoin a potential defense? And I'm going to move rooms on mute with this noise in the background while you answer, but talk a little bit about, about your thoughts about Bitcoin and why could Bitcoin be a life raft for individuals to have exposure to in these times?
Yep. So the root of my economic thought comes from the Austrian philosophy. Read every one. That's the one I naturally kind of lean towards, and I think it just speaks to good karma, and do unto others as you would have done to you, and that resonates with me. That's really why I had such a disgust once I finally knew how the existing financial system worked. I couldn't do it. I couldn't just be a part of it, and just go along with it because I can extract, percents per year, right? it's funny, Bitcoin, it was actually alluded to and sort of foreshadowed by a paper Henry Ford did on electronic money. And I read that actually when I was in college. And there was a first attempt at this called eCash. So I was aware that there was an attempt for sovereign, not or non-sovereign money. And then when it came out and just fulfilled a lot of the rules that were not technologically available to Henry Ford, who wrote that back then, I just wanted to first play and understand, and then made the career change. And it is the lion's share of my investments now as well, because basically before it even came out, I was already it was in my consciousness to look for non-sovereign capital, and gold is kind of a version of that, right? But then the gold system led to fractional reserve banking. So there's no end all be all, one size fits all. There's no perfection. That's not, except in nature. There's no perfect money, right? But why Bitcoin is close to perfect collateral, and this is what I believe it will serve as, is the decentralization of it, the scarcity of it, the fungibility of it, and the fact that it cannot be corrupted by, 82% of the US do not want us funding Ukraine war, but they do it anyways, right? And then I'm not seeing them monetize the debt of the money they're sending there. So are they just control printing it and sending a check? I mean, this is so disgusting. I don't even want to talk about it really. So I think when you tether that awareness with the fact that inflation and that inflation narrative and the boom bust cycles, those aren't natural occurrences, Eric, right? So you were taught this, so was my grandfather, who taught me stocks. Why do you have to save money and then invest money for later? Because gradually your purchasing power is going to be inflated away. Well, why is that the case? Well, because of central banks. Well, when did that start? Late 1700s. Okay, so what did people do beforehand, right? And no one's thinking like that, or very few are thinking like that. And then when you actually look at the apparatus of the over-financialization of the planet, which happened post 1971, it was an extraction of wealth and resources and wealth and labor from all of the planet all at once, cycling all of that up to these not elites, New World Order psychopaths. And it really is amazing that people have been just Pavlovian dog trained to be, I got to put money in the 401k. Why? So they can constantly get fees on you, not even giving you advice. That's insane. And then chase returns by, did you outperform or underperform the benchmark? Well, if you're hedging, you by that very nature, you need to underperform the benchmark, Eric, right? So they really have done an amazing job of PSYOP. And then, just as Karl Marx said, keep people from their history and they're easy to control, right? So I think if everyone listened to us have this conversation, at least half will go, oh my God, why have I been going along with this?
Right. And so, like, when you look at the and I want to get, I guess it's a philosophical question. You've said a couple of times here, and then also I saw in one of your other, I think it was with Robert Breedlove, where you were like, prediction or predicting things is not, it's not your interest. And but isn't that why I pay you to manage my money, is to make a prediction on the future? Why people listen to me for, my writings? It's kind of like, not. And I get what you're saying. It's not about trying to predict things in certain timeframes or anything else, but you have to have a view, right? And you have to bet on that view or on the numbers. You could look at it really.
Our algorithms do a 5-minute forward prediction, a 1-week forward prediction, but as you go out in duration, the reliance of the bell curve distribution of the accuracy of that wanes. In some sense, because I do have a heavy history background as well, in addition to the music that you reference, in some sense, it's very easy for me to be predictive because we just do the same shit over and over again. I just can't pick the exact day.
Yeah.
But I would argue that the parallel system that has now been cut off from America is going to further harm American business and American investors because it's all rapidly going offshore. There's the Swiss, even the UK, Singapore. Oh, magically, it's going to be legal in China again in June. They are attracting all of this development. And then UAE is coming out huge. Dubai is already a mega crypto center. So this system, like the thought process that, oh, it can't win, Elizabeth Warren's going to regulate it away. That's not possible. Cat's out the bag, right? They can't destroy Bitcoin. They can't. And now that they're attempting to, it's actually it's a pain.
Accelerate.
But at the same time, it's like, wow, we made it when I still even get asked this when we pivoted to only crypto, like, why would you guys do that? You know, you had all this pedigree and all this easy way to make money from 9 to 4, you know. It was an ethical and philosophical one, not one based on how much I can earn. So I just don't see how anybody who wants to be diversified and protected could ignore it anymore.
So how do you, as a fund manager and as your own, you know, steward of your own capital and wealth, how are you structuring Libertas Fund? You manage how much right now, approximately?
We're just under
in the fund,
because the fund, as you know, is not mass marketed.
Right. It's not mass marketed, but it's a lot of money still. And you know, you are obviously affected directly by some of these moves that are happening with the mechanics of moving money around between fiat and crypto and the systems. How are you preparing, or what do you use to make sure that you know, you can't get a knock on the door and any one of us that has crypto asset exposure through a structure like yours, or you know, it could, you know, they've obviously been pushing away this spot ETF possibility, which is insanity. And I think that actually could be a big catalyst if Grayscale actually beats the SEC on this.
Yeah, and they're crushing them in court right now.
They're killing them, and it could be a big catalyst for BTC. But how do you end up preparing, you know, to the best of your ability? And is it any more difficult now than 30 days ago, since the banks have gone down that are in the space, to do what you want to do with positioning your funds and LPs?
So we you know, just are pretty maniacal contrarian bears. So we've weathered these various fits and storms better than most because we don't trust anything, right? So we have currently 121 connections to Liquidity, a half dozen custodians. We did have 4 banks, now down to 2, and adding a third. So we've just created redundancies years ago.
Yep.
What was this another mess to deal with that was frustrating, and stuff had to go out of different exchanges and go in and out of USDC, and then this exchange got cut off and only had Silvergate, so then it had to go to another exchange that then wired to a different bank. It was you know, a nightmare for 5 or 6 days, but only an you know, frustrating operational one, right? I'm not as concerned with you know, the current price in fiat, because how his bet's going to be $1 million is not that the demand for Bitcoin pushed the price that high. It's because the dollar's going down, which means
both, yeah.
You and I and investors, all we did was keep our head above water. We didn't actually get a real rate of return. And then it's very important for our legal structure here, which is obviously why one of the reasons you're an LP, is that we've got redundancies in Switzerland and Cayman as a fallback. We've got that with all the tech apparatus to go from hot to cold in about 20 minutes and provide that real hedge to the whole system, which is the reason we got in this space. Is first to hedge. If we make a lot of purchasing power, awesome.
And did you, I would assume, you know, some people, part of the opportunity, I think, because it's such a pain in the ass still, but also the diversion for people to get involved in crypto is because you see all these frauds, you see all these hacks, you see all these potential problems. It seems too complicated. How do you protect your crypto holdings? With regard to custody and insurance and things of that nature.
Yeah, it's not easy. There is a big learning curve, and the UI UX experience is hard for people who are not traders or technologists. What we ensure that we have is that none of our accounts are in an omnibus form, and we trade about 90% of the fund is all spot confirm on chain, 10% are futures and options. So we can track that real time, and we've got a dashboard apparatus that does that. Also, we segregate the accounts by strategy, by token, so they're all separate hot wallets that then have redundant cold wallets where a portion of that exposure, call it 20 or 30, is actually in cold storage. And we've got the blend of SEX exchange dexes and qualified custodians. What we are building now with ledgers is something real sexy. But institutional investors are not so keen on you having self-custody. But to answer your knocking on the door question, Eric, we've got 3 gun safes here. Yeah.
Got it. Good. And we'll start to wrap it up just so that we don't deter people from the length of this podcast. But essentially, and I'm getting another headwind on noise. Forgive me. I'll mute it when I ask. John McAfee, I was watching from like 3 or 4 years ago before he died. He was giving a talk in Malta, and essentially what he said was, it's all become just so much more clear as well, from the genesis of Bitcoin, why it was created, what to battle against, which is the situation in which we live in and the powers that be that control this system. And he said, wait a second, everybody who's voting for this regulatory backdrop, to protect people or whatever else, he said, I'm grateful to be in Malta, and they welcome us right now. But any government and systemic approval, you have to realize, is going to be temporary. You want approval from a system that you're trying to get out of. And if you were in a psychologist's office, you'd be considered insane, right? So that therein, to me, is becoming very vivid. It's like, you want money out of the system, exposed out of the system. As an American, with all the impediments that they're putting on us, how do you feel about that? And then how do you feel about the importance right now for anybody listening to this that hasn't gotten serious about crypto yet, to get it out of the system, some of it?
In one aspect, I like it because Americans are spoiled, rotten, narcissistic, selfish creatures versus others. Like, why it's not as scary for people in Latin America, or, I've got clients from Europe, and one of my partners who's American citizens was from Russia. They can't use their credit cards if they go outside of Russia. Their ACH was turned off. Their money that was in the central bank was confiscated by our central bank, 230 billion. Whether Colombia, Venezuela, these people have lost everything multiple times and are psychologically prepared and then physically prepared, right? So Americans have just had this kind of easy time where we've exported our inflation, debt bombed the whole earth, and thought everything was hunky-dory. So I think in one sense it's good, because hard times create good times, right? So I think that experience is good, but it's not going to be a quick process either. So what I think to prepare, that's just prudent, right? Because if I want to argue both sides, let's say you do nothing and you keep your BS 60/40 equity bond portfolio. Well, what is let's take from our masters, what is our true investment thesis? It's to earn as much fiat as we can to convert to assets, right? Because assets will protect us from losing our labor. Well, bonds are liabilities, Eric, so I would not be a buyer of bonds, right? They just show that even if I own a senior secured bond at Credit Suisse, I'm effed because the government said so. And then obviously commodities are the most pure inflation hedge because they're the input to all of our lives. Almost every investor I know is underweight commodities. Obviously, precious metals need to be some of that, but softs, meats, etc. And how I get access to it is direct, a farm, and then also by the resource companies. Knowing that their valuations in fiat are going to go up and down, I want the asset of the company that then has the mine or has the well or blah, blah, blah. And then the rest of it needs to be in mostly Bitcoin. You know, you can have, most people have enough real estate already. So I'm not throwing that in there. I already have enough too. And that's going to crash as well, probably more so than we think.
Yeah, it's just too widely owned, and if you have too much pressure on people to eat, or they just can't, they don't have a job anymore. How do you see a couple more things, and we'll wrap it up? How do you see, say, a holding in the way the system is set up? If I own shares in, say, resource companies, and there's a systemic bank problem and or broker dealer problem that could spread, is there any risk that my actual equity in these companies just gets confiscated, or is there something that could change in that game?
I mean, a few months ago, I would have said no, but having seen what's been done where you force banks out of business that are not insolvent and you bail in bondholders, I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, that's certainly possible. In a normal, sane world governed by rule of law, absolutely not. Here, I can't give you a probability on it, but what I'm doing personally is I'm aware of that risk, and I assume, okay, am I okay if that goes all the way to nothing? Fine. Yep. And then put yourself in the position where you're not banking on one thing. And I have probably 80% of my wealth in digital assets, primarily Bitcoin, and most of my money's in the fund because of how protected the infrastructure is. I don't care what it's quoted in USD. I literally don't. The whole point of all the trading is to accumulate more, because that is the number one investment strategy for all investors. Accumulate more, whether it's paintings, farmland, gold, whatever tickles your fancy.
Yep, wealth. And frankly, that's what it's taken me a long time to get, I guess you could say, comfortable. I'm still not entirely comfortable with it. It's not a comfortable situation, but basically, like, getting money over into a different system of digital assets, ledger-based, permissionless, trustless, decentralized asset, potentially the purest asset, digital asset that we've ever had, and not wanting to get it back out. I'm not worried about what do I convert it out to, because it's real there. It's there already. If I wanted to buy a house in Switzerland, or if somebody came to me and wanted to buy one of my properties and they said, hey, by the way, can I pay you in Bitcoin? I'd say, sure, go for it. It's already able to do these things. Just because it isn't completely widely used for payment rails yet doesn't really matter. It's once I get it over there, I don't need to worry about getting it back, unless I need to, like you said, I keep a very minimal amount in my JP Morgan Chase account, BMO, to pay bills, to pay employees, to do things like that. And so talk a little bit about, as we wrap it up, just, what's the opportunity like for investors that, may want to talk to you more and or look at the Libertas fund and the opportunities that you guys are seeing?
Yeah, one of the current opportunities, Eric, that we really didn't or weren't able to foresee is we are a Delaware Cayman registered hedge fund, right? So it says Libertas fund on the subscription docs. It doesn't say Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin fund. So one thing that new investors are kind of excited about is that they can allocate to a hedge fund that is 100% digital assets and not have to go to the rigmarole of, oh, now I can't easily wire to Coinbase and And now they're going after Block, which is not guilty of fraud, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, because Cash App is a great place to buy and use Bitcoin to pay. I keep some on Cash App all the time. So, that's something we didn't forecast, Eric, is that because you're actually allocating to shares of the fund, it kind of flies under the radar of being turned off by the various, overlords. Did that answer the question, or do you want me to go further?
Yeah, just, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, I'll list your email. If anybody, that's one of our accredited investors. Or
the website is hyperiondecimus.com. We do have kind of an info landing page that pings part of the team for doing due diligence, but anybody who's a friend of Eric's a friend of mine. And whether we do business or not, I'm happy to share my thoughts and try and add value, because this is a unique time in history. And, we just want to be kind to one another and try and bring this community together and upwards instead of letting them do what they've done to us the last whatever years.
Amen, man. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording here, and thank you for your time, Chris.
Thank you.